Shattered by Brony Numo. Chapter 6. Detective BrightStar knew in the back of his mind that his dentist was probably going to kill him. Despite this, his head continues to fill with the incessant vibrations of his teeth grinding against one another. It was a bad habit, and one he had often tried to break, but still just couldn't seem to, especially when he was on a case. His mind was turning over at a mile a minute, details, facts, figures and plans running through his head. It was a dangerous cycle he knew to get into. He tried to keep his focus on the matters at Hoof, but his mind would keep returning to her. It was the stress, he decided, of dealing with another case. No, not another case. This case. A case too eerily similar to hers. That was it. He knew it. Even if he didn't dare let it rest at the forefront of his thoughts too long, she remained there anyway, lurking, present, but somehow not at the same time. At least he was no longer alone in the corridors. The hospital had been growing steadily busier throughout the day, not to mention dodging the occasional nurse, with or without gurney. As he strode through the passageways, provided somewhat of a distraction. Finally rounding another corner, he came upon the room he had been looking for. Copper, faithful as ever, was standing vigilant watch. The door was, of course, closed. He would have been surprised if it wasn't. As much as he would have liked to interview her in an attempt to get a more firm grasp of what had happened, he knew how vital sleep was for the victim. BrightStar had to suppress a shudder. The victim had always seemed such a callous and deponizing term to him, though he knew such emotional detachment was necessary for the professionalism his job required. He could not help but feel uncomfortable nevertheless. "Hey, cop, anything to report?" "No, sir." A frown settled upon BrightStar's face. "Really? You've got nothing to tell me?" "No, sir. Nothing of significance." "Off the record, Copper, tell me, how've things been around here? What have you heard?" Officer Copper glanced up and down the corridor quickly before meeting his superior's questioning gaze. "In truth, sir, I have noticed something. The mare, Miss Dash, every time they leave her, try and give her some rest, right? She's restless, sir. I can hear her tossing and turning, sometimes moaning. Right awful. I daren't say I've heard none else like it." BrightStar gave an involuntary shudder, both Royal Police members quietening down for a few moments, trying to discern any noises from beyond the door. There was nothing. "And no pony is with her? No nurses? None of her friends?" Copper shook his head. "I've been keeping track. There's no pony else in there with her." "Do you think she's sleeping right now?" "I suppose so, sir. Can't hear nothing, and I expect she's a mite tired out by now. One thing I'm certain on, though, she'll be in no right state for questioning, that's for sure." "I figured as much." BrightStar furrowed his brow, thoughts churning once more. He needed some time to think. "Thanks, Copper. Keep me posted, and I'll see about getting Cuff in here sometime soon to relieve you." "Thank you, sir." Officer Copper nodded curtly and resumed his position by the door. BrightStar strode past towards the end of the corridor. Unbeknownst to him, he was grinding his teeth once more. Another turn led him nearly towards the wide double doors leading to the lobby. His hoofsteps echoed off the confines, and his shadow jumped rhythmically under the shifting beams of fluorescent light as he passed under each fixture. Each hoofbeat registered as a dull thump in his mind. His collar and tie felt entirely too tight, stifling even. He pulled at it with one hoof. His head was pounding. He groaned, rubbing his temple. He glanced up. 2 squares of light signalling the doors, and brightly lit lobby beyond lay ahead. BrightStar glanced to his side. Another door, a plain nondescript metal edifice that might nary have drawn his attention, otherwise stood recessed into the wall. A simple inscription across the top read, "Broom Closet." Ducking to the side, he slipped the door open and glided inside, shutting it behind him. His eyes fell upon a small, damp, dimly lit room. He lit his horn, his magic casting a beam of light upon a few scattered brooms, buckets and other cleaning supplies. An old generator sat in the corner, humming and vibrating. BrightStar shut his eyes, shaking his head back and forth. He pulled his collar even looser, his teeth grinding at a furious pace. His eyes flew open. He saw a broom, and in an instant it was enveloped in his shimmering magical aura. "Oh, not again," he whispered to the darkness. He shook his head. The broom lifted in the air. His head throbbed, thoughts searing his mind like wildfire. He tried to throw the brakes on to no avail. Red flashed before his eyes. "Not again!" His voice filled the narrow space. Without warning, the broom swung down and struck against the generator. A resounding clang echoed through the small room. He lifted it again and swung again. It came down hard with another metallic sound. Over and over, BrightStar's eyes narrowed on the generator as his broom swung hard into it again and again, until the wooden handle shattered in mid-air. He dropped it, then letting the splintered pieces clatter to the ground. He took a deep breath, the sound of the impact still ringing in his ears. He shuddered as he took in each breath, willing himself to calm down. His face was still hot. He wiped a trail of sweat from his brow with a hoof. He backed up against the door. "He's not getting away again. Not this time," he growled. "Not again." He whisked the door open and strode out. A nurse stood just outside, her mouth hanging slack. Staring at him as he exited, BrightStar cast a glance back into the broom closet. The splintered broom lay strewn about the floor, the generator humming away with a few new dents. He looked back to the nurse and straightened his tie. "Someone should really take a look at that." There was just something about hospitals that made Twilight feel uneasy. She wasn't sure if it was the faint yet ever-present antiseptic scent or disconcerting pattern of off-white and sickly green that dominated the decor, or simply the feeling of helplessness and uselessness that sitting around in a waiting room imparted. Glancing around her, she could plainly see her friends shared her reservations. Applejack fidgeted on the couch across the room. The farm pony lay on her back, her eyes screwed tightly shut, as if she was trying to fall asleep and having a particularly hard time of it. Nearby, Rarity seemed intent on distracting herself. If the furiously clacking knitting needle and what was probably supposed to be a scarf were any indication. However, she appeared to be doing a fairly poor job of it. Given the numerous mistakes she had made, her mind clearly wasn't fully into the project. Fluttershy seemed focused enough on it. However, she stared at the knitting pieces suspended in her unicorn friend's magical aura, as if it were the most interesting thing she had ever seen. Twilight sighed, resting her chin upon her hooves in a vain attempt to get comfortable on the hard, knobby couch. A quick glance towards the window revealed a weary face, disshelved mane, and drooping eyes. It suddenly dawned on her exactly how long she had gone without sleep by then. Unbidden, a yawn escaped her. Maybe Applejack had the right idea, she reasoned. Maybe if she could just get a few minutes' rest, she wouldn't feel so beaten down. Twilight Sparkle closed her eyes, but her mind was whirring at a furious pace. She couldn't stop thinking about Rainbow Dash, about everything that had gone so horribly wrong. She wished she could go back to her friend's room. She wished she hadn't had to leave Rainbow Dash's side. Her mind's eye returned again and again to the image of that once strong Pegasus face, contorted in pain and fear, staring at her as Nurse Redheart began her tests. The fear that was the worst part. Rainbow Dash had been scared. She'd reached out for help, but all Twilight could offer had been her hoof. A tingling sensation raced through the limb, as if the Pegasus still held it in her vice grip. Twilight shivered. "Miss Sparkle, if I could get a moment of your time," a stallion's voice cut into her thoughts. Twilight grunted, her eyes still squinted tightly shut. She waved her hoof in front of her in a half-hearted attempt to shoo whoever it was away. I assure you, this is a matter of utmost importance." Twilight cracked one eye open to find Detective BrightStar glancing down at her with a mixture of bemusement and grave concern. She carefully pulled herself to her hoofs to stand before him. "What is it, Detective?" "I've some news, but I think it's best to sojourn somewhere more private first." With a sigh, Twilight reluctantly followed his lead to a more secluded corner of the lobby. "How's she doing?" I spoke with my partner just a moment ago. From what he tells me, the sedative drip they put in her IV isn't working too well. He says she's restless, says she's been tossing and turning and moaning in her sleep. It doesn't sound too good. Oh dear. How well can we trust his judgment? 100%. He's one of the best stallions I've got. Both he and Cuff are. Twilight nodded. Fair enough. It's just... I don't like it. A higher dosage is out of the question then. I'd assume that would do her more harm than good. But no, I don't like it either. So you're saying it probably can't be helped? BrightStar nodded. Probably, but even if she isn't sleeping soundly, the drip ensures she isn't in any pain. Still, there are some wounds only time can heal. Twilight frowned. Is that it then? Or do you have any other news from your investigation? Yes, actually, some good news. Those samples that nurse took have been sent to a lab in Canterlot for analysis. Twilight sparkled. Her curiosity piked. Immediately felt her mood pick up. Really? Well, maybe we'll get somewhere now. Indeed. A college of Dr. Stables should be examining them and comparing them against the Equestrian Magical Database soon. Twilight blinked at the detective incredulously. The EMD? Already? You're familiar with the database, I take it? Of course. I worked with some of the professors who developed it while I was studying under Princess Celestia. BrightStar nodded his approval when Twilight acknowledged. Very good. That makes explaining things easier then. They must have fast-tracked our case then. They usually have a fairly long backlog. I thought as much. Some pony must be pulling some strings behind the scenes. Celestia, Twilight muttered. BrightStar nodded his agreement. That would be my guess as well. From what times I've worked directly with her during my career, I wouldn't put it past her. Twilight's face registered surprise. She had not known of the princess's dealings with the police before. Some unknown urge drove her to press further. How well do you know the princess? BrightStar chuckled lightly. Not personally. I've met her numerous times in a professional capacity. Though, I suppose she trusts me. I'm usually the first pony called on whenever an assignment comes directly from her. And how long have you... Twilight trailed off, her cheeks flushing a faint shade of pink. Been on the force. BrightStar finished for her, a knowing smile crossing his face. Twilight nodded. Too long. Always too long. He shook his head, the grin melting from his features. I'm sorry. A spark returned to his eye almost immediately, though he appeared pensive and distracted. Don't be. It's a living. The detective straightened his tie, clearing his throat in the process. And speaking of which, I'd best be going. I need to find Cuff and see if he has much of anything to report. Without so much as a goodbye, he turned and headed for the door. The nurse on duty glanced up from her desk for only a moment before returning to her book. Good luck, Twilight called after him, and the front door swung closed. A quiet cough sounded behind her. Twilight spun around. Rarity, Fluttershy and Applejack stood at rapt attention, a few paces behind her. Applejack coughed again. Rarity cocked an eyebrow at her fellow unicorn. Twilight smiled sheepishly. Sorry, girls. Just discussing the case. Applejack frowned. I don't like him much. He seems so cold and distant. Rarity glanced at Applejack before returning to Twilight. I concur. He does come across as rather aloof. I'm not sure I feel very comfortable around him. Twilight shrugged, trotting back to the couch with her friends, trailing behind. I think he's just being a professional. Really, anyone who's been doing the work he has for as long as he has is bound to grow a hard shell. If it's all the same, I still don't like him much. Applejack laid down beside her friend, sifting her weight to get comfortable. So, Twi, what is a EMD? Yes, darling, do tell us. Just what is going on? Twilight Sparkle breathed deeply, searching for the right words. Well, the princesses need a way of keeping track of all their subjects, so the Equestrian Magical Database is just that. A huge catalogue of every pony in Equestria, sorted by name, birthday and more. So, how does that help us? Applejack scratched behind her head, looking confused. Twilight sighed. It's hard to explain. Basically, the system is also set up to contain a magical record of each individual pony. It works like this. You know how every pony, unicorn or not, has some magic in them, right? Sure, Applejack agreed. Rarity and Fluttershy nodding as well. Well, the magic within a pony is also completely unique to that pony. So, using a spell, a higher level unicorn can analyse the magical energy of any one pony and then be able to read that pony's unique magical signature. By cataloguing each signature with its respective pony in the database, the police can use the magical signature to match pieces of evidence to their respective ponies and help solve crimes. Okay, Sugar Cube, you lost me there. Look at it this way. If you cut a piece of your mane off, does it just become generic nameless hair? Applejack shook her head slowly. No, it's still my hair, ain't it? Twilight nodded. Exactly. It identifies with you, so it makes sense that part of the magical energy within you stays in the hair, right? I guess so. Right, so if a stray hair is found at a crime scene, its magical signature can be read compared to the database and matched with the pony it belongs to. That's the benefit of using the EMD, and that's what they're doing now with the... Twilight gave an involuntary shudder. Fluid samples they've collected. Rarity grimaced, looking more than a little queasy. Oh dear, that's absolutely repulsive. But will they find out who... Twilight nodded quickly. Yes, they'll be able to tell her who it was. There is a catch, though. What? Rarity and Applejack exclaimed, nearly in unison. Analysing a pony's individual magic energy is still a pretty new practice, and the information is usually catalogued into the system at birth. So if a pony was born before they started the system or outside of a hospital, they might not have a magical signature added to the database. Twilight glanced at each face. Worry creased all three. Don't worry, though, she spoke quickly, trying to convince herself of her words as much as her friends. I'm sure we won't run into that problem. How can you be so sure? Twilight smiled at Applejack's question. Because the Wonderbolts are extremely high-profile ponies. They would have had their signatures catalogued as a safety precaution of that I'm positive. Rarity nodded at this. But darling, are you sure it was one of them? After all, we don't really know. There's no doubt in my mind. Twilight nodded curtly. Rarity swallowed the rest of her reply. I do hope you're right, Twilight Sparkle. But when will we know for sure? Twilight sighed, suddenly deflated, and she sunk back into the couch. All we can do now is wait. Applejack closed her eyes, resting her chin on crossed hooves. Seems like waiting all we've been doing since last night. Silence fell over the four friends, and for a long while a sublime quiet filled the waiting room, broken only by steady breathing and the occasional swish of a turning page as the on-duty nurse pursued her novel. Fluttershy fidgeted in her place, unable to get comfortable. Beside her, Rarity had returned to her knitting, but hardly paid any attention to it. Twilight and Applejack both rested their heads in their hooves. They looked like they might be asleep, but Fluttershy couldn't be quite sure. She swallowed lightly. The air felt heavy against her, weighed down, with the silence all around her. A bead of sweat rolled down from her mane, even though the room was not too warm. She fidgeted again. The quiet and the still air pressed against her chest. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a squeak came out. She couldn't form the words. The silence was too overwhelming. She reached out and pressed a hoof to Rarity's shoulder. The unicorn, glad for a distraction, set her half-made scarf down and turned to her best friend. Her best comforting smile spread across her features. Yes, dear? What is it? The deadening silence shattered, and Fluttershy took a deep breath and found her voice. Oh, Rarity, I'm so confused. I don't... Nothing seems like it makes sense anymore. Rarity sighed. Her smile vanished. The regal pony suddenly looked very tired. I understand what you mean, my dear. We're all still very confused. She raised a hoof to rub at her eyes. It came away wet. This whole ugly mess has been very trying for every pony. Don't you feel like something's missing, though? Fluttershy bit her lip, a lock of long pink hair falling across her face. Rarity pursed her lips, her face scrunched in thought. Whatever could you mean? Where's Pinky? Rarity's eyes went wide before blinking a few times. You're right, she spoke slowly. Where is Pinkie Pie? I would have thought she'd be here by now. Rarity glanced over at Twilight Sparkle. The other unicorn's chest rose and fell slowly, peacefully. Rarity reached out to tap her friend on the shoulder, but hesitated. A light smile fell across her face as she watched Twilight's sleeping form for a few short moments. She drew her hoof back. Poor dear's been up and running around all night, she whispered, turning back to Fluttershy. She needs her rest. What should we do? Do you think something else bad might have happened? Rarity shook her head. I doubt it, darling. But if you are worried, I suppose it couldn't hurt to go check up on the little dear. She's probably more rattled about this than we are. Fluttershy nodded silently. Do you think we should go find her? Please. Rarity chuckled lightly. Of course, dear. We'll leave Twilight for some much-needed rest and go ourselves. She was cut off by a yawn. If you don't mind, Rarity, I think I'll stay back as well. I'm still... Applejack yawned once more, rolling over onto her back. I'm still might tuckered out. Rarity nodded gently. Applejack pulled one of the couch's few pillows underneath her head and slipped her hat down over her eyes to block the light. Soon her chest, too, was rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. Rarity and Fluttershy shared a small smile. Come along, darling. We shall see what has become of our dear pink friend. With a final glance towards their sleeping companions, the two mares slipped silently from the room. Some sort of buzzing noise, a strange periodic low humming sound filled her ears. Rainbow Dash rolled over onto her side, clasping a hoof over her upturned ear. The humming continued, unabated. She scrunched up her face, wishing that the annoyance would leave her to her rest. A short moment later, with no such luck, she rolled onto her back once more, emitting a sound somewhere between a grunt and a low moan. Her head still felt groggy, her thoughts merely swimming through half-conscious murk. Within the sea of unintelligible bits and pieces of ideas, though, one stood free and clear. Something was making an annoying buzzing sound, and she needed to investigate. Rainbow Dash opened her eyes. She immediately regretted that decision. The two bright lights of before somehow seemed even brighter, and her eyes registered the light as a little more than searing pain. She squinted them shut almost instantly, another groan rolling from her lips. The shock of new light cut through her mind's haze, though she still felt a bit numb. With her daze subsiding, she wondered exactly where she was. She certainly couldn't be at home. The sunshine of her room was never so bright in the morning, and whatever she was laying on certainly was not cloud stuff. It took a few more seconds for the last remaining fog to clear from her mind. Memories of the hospital came rushing back to her. At least she thought it was the hospital. She remembered Nurse Redheart standing over her, whisking her blankets away, exposing her, touching her with something cold. Rainbow Dash shivered, a tingling sensation spreading up through her lower belly. She remembered something more, though. Twilight Sparkle, her friend, with a concerned face, standing by her side, reaching out to her and holding her hoof. She was there for her, taking care of her. Rainbow Dash wondered if Twilight was still there, waiting for her to wake up. Still squinting hard, she opened her eyes a mere crack. The light didn't seem so bad this time. She tried again and again, her eyes finally blinking their last remaining inhibitions away and opening fully to her surroundings. The same hospital room as before fell into view, and it was clear nobody else was in the room. She was alone, with the same two white walls and the same ugly green sheets. These were tangled in a mess around her body, products of a fitful night's or a few hours' sleep. It slightly dawned on Rainbow Dash that she had no idea what time of day it even was, or how long she had been in the hospital. Wearily she sat up, lifting her hooves to rub the last of the sleep from her eyes. Then setting her hooves back down, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. She squinted at her foreleg, trying to gain a better view. A bandage was wrapped around her limb, just as the joint concealing a small bowl from which a plastic tube jutted. Her eyes traced the tube, following its curve up to a bag hung on a rack above her, filled with some foreign liquid. Despite her warm tangle of sheets, Rainbow Dash suddenly felt very cold. She could feel a pressure on the joint, just beneath the tube. Could feel it sticking into her. Something filled her with the overwhelming desire to get it out. She jerked her foreleg quickly away from the rack with its chilling bag. She drew a sharp intake of breath as the tube tugged against her movement, and the sudden pinprick of pain shot through her limb. Angrily, she set her foreleg down by her side. The alien tube remained. Soon the quick spike of pain dulled and finally went numb. Rainbow Dash shivered. Her whole body felt a little numb. A part of her mind told her that it was just some sort of medicine and that the sensation would wear off soon enough. Another part was merely glad that her head no longer throbbed and that the cotton was gone from her ears. Her mouth was dry though, and the more she thought of it, the worse it seemed. Water! She needed water. She felt her dry mouth and throat beg for it as she cast her gaze about the room. There was a sink nestled against the wall in the far corner, too far for her to reach, without pulling the tube out. She shuddered her foreleg, tingling at just the thought of the pain, and the thirst continued to eat away at her. A wave of relief washed over her when she heard the door open. That would be the nurse, she reasoned, coming to check on her. Rainbow Dash coughed, turning and opening her mouth to ask for a glass of water. But in that moment, her breath was stolen from her. Surprised to see me? Playful twinkling eyes locked on her from across the room. Rainbow Dash shrank back into the bed. She could only stammer weakly. You! A grin tugged at the corners of his mouth. Yes, utterly speechless. Oh, come now. I should think you'd be quite happy to see me. A deep, low, calm voice cutting through the air like a knife, drawing it away with swift swipes. Rainbow Dash couldn't breathe. His eyes were laughing. I barely even got to the best part. You're not supposed to be here! Au contraire, my dear. You see, I was so worried about you. After all, you left so quickly, I hardly even got the chance to say goodbye. His grin was wider now, threatening to split his face from end to end along a dark seam. He advanced, smooth as your coat rippling over a toned muscular frame. Each hoof fall echoed through the room as a clap of thunder, one after the other. She scrambled backwards, clawing at the bed for purchase, throwing up sheets, pillows, anything that might bury her, hide her, mask her from view. All the while he grew closer, closer. His hot breath rolled over her neck. His lips were at her ear. Of course you do know, we were only just getting started. Rainbow Dash screamed.